discussion. Welcome to the Adam call. So,
Okay, well, thanks. I'm really happy to be here. I'm part of this conference, so thanks for inviting me. This is my work with Friedrich, Hackmann, Sofia, Moroni, and Nandrup. Okay, so this paper is focusing on matching markets. And matching is a key function of a lot of markets in education, labor markets, transportation, other settings where parties on both sides of the market care about the identity of their trading. So in settings where people care about the identity of their trading partner, there have been a number of practical implementations of matching mechanisms motivated by theory. Building on sort of a large literature on sort of two-sided matching markets with pretty rich heterogeneity on both sides that motivated the use of things like deferred acceptance. Okay. Now that said, most empirical work on these types of markets assumes full information, or at least as people know their own preferences on both sides. And the theoretical case behind the use of stable matching mechanisms is typically required agents to at least know what they want. Okay. Now, that said, in practice, colleges, higher education programs, employers can use things like essays, interviews, or other subjective readings of the candidates' application materials to rank applicants. And these things can be noisy, and they probably don't tell the employer or the college everything that they would want to know. So a reviewer might want to know some private information that is held by its competitors, okay, how your interviews of rivals went, or by the applicants themselves. Okay? So what we're going to do here is we're going to ask how firms, in this case, medical programs, compete for students, in this case by setting admission standards in the presence of interdependent values, and how the presence of interdependent values, in the sense that firms care about private information held by others to rank applicants, how the presence of those interdependent values and programs' responses to the situation affects production, in this case, of human capital of doctors. That's what we're doing. So in order to do that, first I need to convince you that the kind of interdependent values and sort of imperfect information that I'm going to be talking about exist in our first order in this setting. So I'm going to provide some evidence for that in a matching market, as well as some evidence of strategic responses to this situation by at least one program. Okay, and the key margin here is going to be the use of credible signals of applicants' preferences. So programs are going to have a reason to care that you like them. Right? Institutions in our setting and natural experiments that took place partway through our sample are going to let us test for in the first half of the talk and quantify when we come to the model some alternate sources of interdependent values. So we're going to be thinking about a winner's curse in the event that a candidate is rejected by competitors. We're also going to have match effects. So if a program might just like people who like it technologically, or because people know something about how well they'll do with the program that enters their preferences. And closely related to that, we're going to be thinking about self-selection when applications are costly. So we're going to try to tell these things apart and then allow for them in the model. And we're going to be doing this in a setting that at least I think is empirically important. Okay, so that setting is medical schools in Denmark. Right? So let me tell you a little bit about how this works. So these are 5-year programs. People finish with a master's degree and then they just start residency training. Unlike the US, students apply directly out of high school. Okay. In Denmark, for our sample period, there were 3 programs, Copenhagen, Aarhus, and Aarhus. And the way you get in to college in Denmark is via a centralized matching procedure. It's a college proposing deferred acceptance procedure. One thing that's nice for our purposes in this setting is that programs rather, are going to have the ability to express preferences over some set of students. Okay, so it's not going to be just you take some test scores and those determine a ranking. Programs are going to be able to exercise discretion. Okay. It's about 1,200 admissions per year. That turns into about 1,000 doctors per year. Relatively stable over time, growing a little bit. Policymakers in this setting care about dropout. So, conditional on showing up, you have about 15 to 20% dropout rates. That might not seem high, but that's pretty high for, these are the most elite programs in the country. So it's high for an elite program. We looked into why people are dropping out, and basically it's people who are struggling academically. So it's sort of very well predicted by bad grades. Universities care because their funding is attached to what comes from student progress. Is that in the event that people fail out, the universities get full of us. Something they care about. Okay, we're going to have the universe of college application data from the Danish register data. We're going to see the universe of applications, admissions, and enrollments. We're going to see programs rankings here, which I think is novel, as well as the applicants' ordinal rankings, which are submitted to the mechanism but not seen by the programs. Okay, we're going to be thinking about preference shifters that programs observe. So the key thing here is going to be location. So where you live in Denmark is going to predict where you tend to apply. Okay. In terms of outcomes, we have transfers, we have completion. We're going to be focusing on 3-year dropout today. Completion is pretty simple. And about halfway through our study period, there's a policy change where one of the programs made a big investment in getting better at evaluating candidates. I'll talk about that in a couple slides. But, let me skip the literature. There's some prior work here. The key novelty here is interdependent program values together with kind of information about candidates' preferences. So and let me just give you, the key intuition that I want you to keep in mind. So think about a program, let's say program 1, that's considering 2 candidates, and they look about the same after interviews, tests, and whatever it is that the programs do to evaluate these candidates. And candidate A says, I'll probably, there's some other stuff I like better. I'll take your offer if I don't get those things. And candidate B says, if you make me an offer, I will accept it. You're my first choice, and here's some credible evidence to that effect. So who should program 1 prefer? Well, if the other programs hold some payoff relevant information for program 1, then the event that A takes the offer is bad news. Okay? So all else equal, program 1 should prefer B. Of course, if program 1 gets better at screening, then it's more likely that the other programs are the ones making the mistake. So that should mitigate the winner's curse. Now, it might also be that the student's preferences are associated with the program's payoff. And in that case, also all else equal, program 1 should prefer candidate B. Okay. Now, if we think about a reform where program 1 gets better at screening, but it also raises the cost of applying to the program, the effects there are ambiguous on this margin. So that's going to be an empirical question we're going to look at. Okay, let me just spend like 1 minute on how how admissions works. This is going to be useful for our design. And I'll show you some descriptive evidence, and we'll get to the model. So in Denmark, there are 2 ways to get into colleges, or actually programs. So I keep saying colleges. You apply to a program, which is a major at the university. First way, quota 1, applicants are just passively ranked by their high school GPA. Okay, so if you only had quota 1, this would just be a serial dictatorship. About 50 to 70% of seats, depending on the year, are allocated to quota 1. Okay. In addition to that, there's quota 2, where the programs can kind of rank candidates as they wish. Okay? So they can look at specific subject grades on the transcript. So a medical program might want to put more weight on kind of science grades relative to humanities than would a program in a different field, for example. In addition, they can require extra materials. So they can have their own exam. One program in our sample did that. They can have interviews. Programs do that. And so the efforts here can differ a lot across programs. Okay, let me tell you how assignment works. It's a college proposing deferred acceptance algorithm. Students are just going to fill out a rank order list with their quota 1 applications. If you want to apply quota 2, in addition, then you can check a box, and then you'll have to provide additional materials. Okay? Right? And I'm going to give you an example of how this works in practice. But effectively, if you choose to apply quota 2 to a program, then we're just going to stick the quota 2 version of that program into your rank order list just after the quota 1 version. So you're applying for quota 2 seats in the event that your GPA is not high enough to get in the normal quota 1. So here's an example. Here's hypothetical Danish high schoolers college application. So they're going to submit a rank order list of programs. They're listing medicine at ours first, medicine at our dentist second, dentistry and math, sort of non-medical programs, third, fourth. And this person is going to choose to apply to quota 2 to both of the Argos programs. They're just going to get stuck into their extended rank order list right after the quota 1 version, and then it's this extended rank order list over here on the right that's going to get submitted to the college proposing team. Programs are submitting lists for the quota 2 applicants that determine the priority of the quota 2 pseudo programs. Quota 1 is just rank education. Okay. Good. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about the sample and the data. We'll get to descriptives. So as I mentioned, there's 3 programs. What we're looking at here is just a set of all applicants to each program. Okay, so if you applied to multiple programs, you could be in multiple columns here. So about 25 to 30,000 applicants to each program over our study period from 94 to 2013. Key things I want you to notice here. First, conditional on applying to a medical program, you're fairly likely to list it first among all programs, but that's much more likely if you are local to the area that university is located. So,
sorry. Yeah. Can I think about these quotas as revealing the intensive preferences from the applicant's perspective?
Yeah, that's right, and I'll show you some.
And if it is so, how many applicants put the quota 2 in their first choice?
Oh. How many of them is it the case that their first choice they also apply quota 2? Yeah, I don't know that number off the top of my head. It's more likely than for lower ranked. So, for people, yeah, I'll show you some evidence that it does reveal some intensity preferences. But people do apply, to a program first and then only quota 1 and then another program second that they'll submit a quota 2 application. Okay, so what I want you to notice here. So let's look at, so I put Argos and Odense in red, but I'm going to show you results for all 3. Argos and Odense are kind of competing more against each other. People would tend to prefer Copenhagen. Okay, what I want you to notice here. So let's look at the Argos column. Conditional on applying to this program, about half of the applicants, 43%, are listing it first. But among people who are local to Argos, that's almost 3/4. And among people who are local to the rival program, Odense, it's about 1/4. Okay. So if you're from Odense's region, Argos sees your application, they can assume that it's fairly likely that they are not the first choice. Okay. Same story for Odense, but the other way around. Right. So location predicts ranking, conditional on applying. Second point, not everybody applies quota 2, and the shares differ across programs. Okay. So for Copenhagen, the quota 2 application is the least demanding. 60% of people who apply also apply quota 2. About a third for ours. For Odense, which sort of asks for the most materials, about a 1/6 of applicants submit a quota 2 application. Yeah, and second, if you look sort of down, here at the sort of admissions outcomes. Okay, conditional on being placed in the school, about 10 to 12% of people don't show up in September. They sort of opt out of the mechanism, take an outside option. Conditional on starting, 3-year dropout rates are about 12%. Those numbers are low. Okay. Good. Okay. So first point I want to convince you of. So programs are doing something different with the quota 2 decisions than just ranking by GPA. You could, in principle, just take like the top GPA people who didn't quite meet the threshold for quota 1. In fact, what you see is conditional on having applied quota 2. You are more likely to get in if you have a high GPA, but sort of at that threshold, you're still only about 70% likely, only about 2/3 of people with GPAs just below the threshold who have applied quota 2 get in. Okay. Tiny bit of waitlist stuff down here. It's pretty minor in this market. Okay, so they're doing something different, and it seems to work. It seems to predict lower dropout. Okay, so I'm going to show you 2 graphs on this. Here we're just, the running variable is just GPA relative to the threshold. I'm stacking all 3 programs in all years here. I'm just showing you in scatter in the plot. We have a regression in the picture, but you see, sort of the highest GPA quota 2 applicants, about 4% less likely to drop out. So it seems like it's picking up something. Now, of course, quarter two applicants are not ranked by GPA. They're ranked by however the program chooses to rank them. So let me show you a figure where we're comparing sort of the marginal quota of one applicant to the marginal quota of two applicants. Okay. So what we've got here is just again stacking programs of years. -1 denotes the highest ranked quota two applicant in that year. And sort of negative epsilon 0 is the last admitted quota two applicant in the programming year. And then on the right hand side here, we've got sort of your ranking by GPA and the people who are admitted via quota one. So what you see is sort of indeed for people admitted via quota one, dropout rates are falling in GPAs for high scoring students do better. Dropout rates are also falling in quota two rankings. The top admitted quota two students are sort of much less likely to drop out. And sort of at the margin, the marginal quota two student is better than the marginal quota one student. Yes.
When you say dropout is when at the program or of the higher education system?
Yeah, this is 3-year dropout out of the program, but it looks really similar if you look at like dropout out of medicine. Okay, so we looked into like are people switching to other medical programs? There's very little of that. They're not like dropping out of university necessarily. Some of them are enrolling in other things that are less demanding. Kind of like related fields that are not medicine. Yeah, if you look at like, do you get a 10-year, do you get a degree 10 years later in medicine? It looks pretty similar. Okay, so it seems to be doing something. Let me tell you about Ardensis reform. So this is kind of like the key experiment here. They were concerned that they had high dropout rates, despite sort of, despite having, relatively few quota two seats, despite getting a lot of applicants, they were worried that people were dropping out. So they changed how admissions worked for their faculty of health sciences, which included medicine and a couple other programs. So they did two things. First, they negotiated with the government to expand the quota two share to 50%. Okay, so they're taking more people through the discretionary channel, fewer just based on GPA. And they added a bunch of stuff that candidates had to do. Right? So they increased, they added a 25-minute interview conducted by faculty for all applicants. And they added their own exam so that people had to sit for. It was specific to the program. They added an essay requirement. So these are things that you would think might increase the cost to applicants. If you don't want to sit for the exam, you wouldn't apply. But that might help the program screen better, yes.
Why are they worried about dropouts? They're going to have a set of professors. The opportunity cost is relatively low. What is it that they?
Why are they worried? I mean, they are worried. The opportunity cost is you're spending like some resources and a few years.
But those resources are essentially fixed for a program. It's the, they educate in big lectures and
for medicine, they have labs. It's a fairly expensive program per capita.
so later on, but in the first.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Like the program is worried about dropout because the program gets paid based on student progress. If people don't pass their third-year exams, the program gets paid less.
Okay.
They worried about, so they thought about this, so they have like external graders, so for these exams, so you would think the program would just try to graduate everyone, it's their institutions to prevent that. There's a broader question that we're not addressing in this paper of like, if the government knows that some number of people are going to drop out, why don't we make more seats? From the program's point of view, though, the capacity is regulating. So if the program wanted to get bigger, they couldn't. Yeah, good. So no, there's nothing about the curriculum or the study program that changed. So let me show you what happened. So sort of event study around the reform. So here, I'm going to look at sort of residual dropout rates, just residualized by GPA. Okay, over time, so sort of pre-period over here on the left. Solid line here is the density. And what you see is that falls by about 7 percentage points after the reform. It's fairly flat before. And then our house goes up a little bit. To say this sort of thin dashed line here is Copenhagen. Anyway, it seems to do something for events. Right. So I'm going to look at what happened at our house. Okay? So I want to focus on our house basically because it's it would compete with events. Copenhagen, most applicants would prefer to events, and so our house may be more affected by changes in events' admissions scheme. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to split candidates based on their first preference in the application that they submit. Okay, now again, programs don't see this. So if you're applying to our house doesn't know that whether you're listed events first or not. If we look at the right panel here, we're going to look at, again, residual dropout rates, residualized by GPA. And what we see is that things didn't change that much for people, things basically didn't change for people who preferred ours. Dropout rates maybe fell a little bit for people who preferred Copenhagen. For people who preferred Odense but ended up at our house, you see a big increase in dropout rate, 12 percentage points at the point estimate. You can reject 0. Okay. So it looks like, okay. So that looks to me like maybe there's some scope for, our host being negatively impacted by this reform, either through the channel of the selection of applicants changing or through the winners curse, people who preferred events but didn't get it. So I'm going to try to sort of tease those two stories apart a little bit in the next couple of slides. Okay. So here I'm going to first just try to show you some direct evidence of interdependent program values. Yeah. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to take the set of candidates who submitted quota 2 applications to both others and events, and I'm going to construct data sort of pairs. I'm going to construct a variable that's sort of 1 if candidate 1 persisted, if candidate 1 dropped out and 2 didn't, minus 1 if 2 dropped out and 1 didn't. Right. So first column just says, okay, these things are sort of, Odense preferring candidate 1 to 2 is correlated with our host preferring 1 to 2, but not that much. Programs, disagree on who they prefer. And then I'm going to look at differences in dropout. And the main takeaway I want you to get here is that Odense's ranking predicts not dropping out conditional on our host's ranking. So you see that sort of among if you just look at people regardless of where they enroll, but if you restrict to sort of pairs where neither candidate enrolled in Odense, you see a 6 percentage point difference. Odense prefers 1 to 2, condition on our host's ranking, sort of directionally the right way for candidates who both enroll in Odense. You can split this sort of pre versus post as well. So if you want the effect in the post period, you want to add sort of this negative 0.05, this negative 0.07. That's significant. So kind of a 12 percentage point difference conditional on our host's ranking in the post period. So again, hopefully some direct evidence for interdependent program values. Okay, a couple other things we do in the paper. I want to show you the model. So just like 2 last pieces of evidence. First, here is that the programs exhibit home bias. So if you're Odense, then if you get better, okay, if you are subject to the winner's curse, you might want to favor locals because I showed you that locals are much more likely to prefer you. If you get better at screening, you might want to do that less. So what we see here is consistent with that. So this is residualized probability of quota 2 admission, residualized by GPA. In the pre-period, Odense is favoring locals and penalizing our host locals by a few percentage points. That kind of goes away in the post period. That goes away in the post period. If anything, they're sort of favoring our host locals. Okay, but ours is a little bit more complicated. Ours kind of adopted a strategy of favoring foreigners in the post period. At least what Odense is doing here is strategic response to sort of the right strategic response to interdependent values in various ways. There's a couple more things that we have that I didn't have space to put in the slides. So one thing, First, so just to summarize, the first thing is that sort of quota 2 applications and admissions together seem to predict low dropout. One thing I didn't show you is that people whom are density ranks very highly, who enroll at other programs, not at density, are less likely to drop out 6 percentage points. So it seems like a density ranking is informative about outcomes elsewhere, not just at a density. Show you some direct evidence of interdependent program values. One thing I didn't show you here that we looked at the impact of applying quota 2 among people who were admitted via the GPA channel. So this gets to your question. Among people admitted purely by GPA, people who have submitted a quota 2 application are about 2.7 percentage points less likely to drop out conditional on GPA. So it seems like the decision to apply conveys some information. And then some evidence that program strategies, district density strategies, seems to respond to interdependent values. Okay, so now I'm going to show you in the remaining 13 minutes. I want to show you a model. Try to rationalize these facts in equilibrium. Think about a counterfactual. Okay, so broadly, what we're doing here, we're modeling students and programs. On the student side, we're going to be thinking about perfect information about their talents, their potential outcomes, whether they'll graduate, and their admissions chances. Students are going to have preferences over programs. Those are going to depend on their GPA and where they live. They may be correlated with their talents and with the signals that they would produce when programs evaluate them. And they're going to think about which programs do I apply to, quota 1, so like what rank order list do I submit? And then which ones do I submit quota 2 applications? Quota 1 applications can depend on my preferences. For quota 2, which is costly, I'm also going to have to think about my costs of applying and my chances of getting it, which is what I know. On the program side, we're going to model the signals they get, their admissions rules for quota 2, and then students drop out of persistence. Okay, so for those of you who've seen a previous version of this, we now have 3 insight options, so all the medical programs. Each medical program has a given measure of quota K seats for K equals 1 or 2, and there's a continuum of students. Okay, a student is characterized by some observable stuff, X, that's commonly observed by us and by every participant in this market. So that's going to be GPA and location in the empirical model. Students have a utility. So for each program J, you have some UJ, that's what the student gets if they go there, private to the student. Program J is going to get omega J if the student goes there. Nobody sees that, but the program is going to get a signal SJ, which may be correlated with omega J and also with utilities. The signal SJ is going to be private to program J. In addition, there's going to be some application costs, which determine sort of how hard it is to apply quota 2, and those are also private to the student. There's some distribution of X's, and then conditional on X, there's a joint distribution of utilities, signals, and omegas and costs. Good. Timing. So each student is just going to observe their own X, their utilities and costs. They're going to decide how to apply. Once they do that, each program is going to observe the X's and signals of its applicants, and it's going to pick a ranking function. Okay, some measurable function that takes X's and signals and turns them into a ranking from 0 to 1. Students are going to get their matches, they're going to get payoffs, they'll pay their application costs. Medical programs are going to get omega. Questions? Okay. So let me just tell you a little bit about how we simplify the problem. So we're going to assume that students are truthful with respect to their quota 1 applications. Okay. Formally, it's a college proposing deferred acceptance procedure. There's no guarantee. It's a large market. There's a lot of options. We think it's hard to find the manipulations in this setting. So we think it's plausible in that setting. Quota 2 applications is going to be an expected value calculation. So people are going to pick the thing that's best in an expected value sense. We're going to assume that medical programs rank applicants for quota 2. by their expected payoff conditional on the event that they accept the offer. Okay? So the common values come in here because this expectation is an equilibrium object. Depends on what the other programs are doing and how the candidates are applying. Okay. In theory, okay, under some conditions, sort of a conditional independence condition on signals and payoffs, the rankings are monotone in signals, which means that instead of thinking about this fairly high dimensional sort of ranking function, we can just think about cutoffs. So there's going to be some like minimum signal you would need as a function of x that determines whether you would get it if you apply. So we're going to be thinking about cutoffs here. Empirically, we're not going to make this conditional independence assumption, but we're going to restrict to monotone strategies. So we're going to assume that programs' rankings are monotone signals for text. You can check whether that's reasonable. Estimates. We have an outside option here, so there's like you get a payoff of 0 if you don't go to any program. You don't match. We're also going to be thinking about it. Yeah.
So this theory is it the case that if you have some notion of affiliation, modern condition independence, you still get monotone ranking, monotone signals?
We don't have such a result because so the challenge is like the sets that you're conditioning on are not rectangles because of the tested applications. It'd be great if we had a result like that. So we have an on-platform outside option as well. So we're going to treat this one a little bit in a special way. So there's going to be an option 4, which is kind of a single, like aggregate sort of best non-medical program you can apply to. Students can include it in their quarter 1 rank order list. They get some payoff there if they're placed. But we're going to basically take admissions chances to that program as given. So those are not going to adjust in counterfactuals. They're going to be a function of X. So this is just to capture, like, I might apply medicine, but maybe I'll list math first. Not that many people are sort of at this margin, so kind of the cutoff for like math at University of Copenhagen is not going to move that much. Changes in how medical admissions work. But that's what we do there. Okay, let me so to fix ideas and sort of show you how this works, let's think about an equilibrium in which programs' rankings are monotone in S for a particular value of X. This is, again, like a GPA and location tuple. And I want to think about an X where the person's GPA is below the quarter 1 cutoffs. Okay, so this is a person who has a low enough GPA that the only way they'll get it is via quarter 2. Okay, we deal with the quarter 1 case as well in the estimates, so just to simplify our lives here. So what we've got here is I've sort of split the possible quarter 2 applications this person could submit into 3 categories. So on the left over here, we've got sort of applications that rank program 1 first. On the right, we've got applying to 2 first, and then 1, which you'll accept only in the event you don't get into 2. In the middle, you're sort of not applying to program 1. And I've got sort of quantiles of the signal distribution of each program. That's the program 1 on the x-axis and program 2 on the y-axis, respectively. So there are going to be some cutoffs for this value of x, s1 bar and s2 bar of x, where you need a signal above that to get into the respective program. So let me just define the transit D1 of X and S bar. This is the set of people with observables X that program 1 could get via program 2. So it's everybody who preferred 1 and applied to it, and then the people who preferred 2 who are below 2's bar. Okay, so there's some admissions rule program 1 could choose where it could get any of these people. The people program 1 is in fact getting are the people in this set D1 of X and S who are above the cutoff of program 1. And so when we think about like what is the probability that people who are matched to this program at this value of X drop out, it's going to be the probability that people in this green region drop out. Now to solve the model, we need to think about counterfactuals. We just need to find these cutoff functions. They have to satisfy 2 things. First, they've got to satisfy the capacity constraints. So if you integrate the measure of everyone above the cutoff who takes the offer, that's got to add up to the program's capacity, and the value of the marginal candidate has to be equated at all cells. So sort of for people at this margin, this green area, at this X, the expectation of sort of the program's payoff, given that you're in this set, it's got to be the same as that other X's. So real quickly, for the empirical model, latent stuff is jointly normal. We're going to sort of normalize the diagonal of this covariance matrix. Or fix the diagonal of this covariance matrix to have scale 1. Fix the scale of utilities to 1. Core 2 application costs are going to be school specific or program specific and independent of utility shocks and signals. Linear index for utility. And then we're going to model the potential outcome of persistence at program. So the way that works is that you're going to persist at program J in the event that X alpha, some sort of function of observables, plus a latent persistence shock is positive. Right? And then this persistence shock is going to have some conditional distribution, conditional on all the other stuff, the signals and utilities, which is normal. So I've written out the full equation here, but where this comes from, so what we're interested in are basically correlation parameters, rho j, or sort of regression coefficients, sigma inverse times rho j, which are going to be like sort of the effect, how omega j varies as you vary one of the elements of the signal and utility vector, holding all else fixed. Where this comes from is if you had assumed that everything, including the potential outcomes, were jointly normal, and the potential outcomes had variance 1, then the conditional distribution would have this form. So that's where it comes from. But we're not specifying the covariance between the potential outcomes. I'm just giving you sort of one potential outcomes conditional distribution. I mean, don't know how the potential outcome at program 1 relates to that at program 2. We're going to fix graduation parameters over time and use the policy change. Okay. And programs are going to care about persistence probability plus some non-graduation preferences. You might just like certain people. You might like locals, even if they don't graduate more. Okay. Estimation. I'm going to just give you a very high-level statement of what we do here. But basically, we have a set of indirect inference moments where we are matching regressions, linear LPMs that we ran in the data. So do you graduate as a function of all prior stuff? You get placed in program J as a function of X and all prior stuff. Together with moments, they're going to force the model predicted and observed number of people above the bar in each program to be equal. Okay, so that's kind of in the style of matching market shares, BLP, and that it's going to let us estimate the model without solving it. This is not it's indirect inference, but it's not a full solution that we're estimating and conditioning on the cutoffs and the data. Yep. I'm going to parameterize the cutoff functions directly. Okay. 2 minutes. Let me show you some estimates, and then I'll show you one counterfactual. Okay. So these are just a couple of estimates from selected parameters from the post period. So just 2 points I want to make. First, we find sort of consistent with what we would have thought that application costs tend to be higher at a density that arrives. So in the application costs, again, there's some variance around covariance costs, right? It tends to be more costly to play density. These are higher than in the previous as well. Second thing, here, if you were to regress omega on omega j, sort of potential outcome, sort of latent variable in the potential outcome equation, on utility for the own program, these are the coefficients you would get, they're positive. So liking a program tends to predict doing well there and not dropping out. And then here we're looking at the coefficients on open signal, again, conditional on all the utilities of the other signals. And what you see here is that a density signal seems to be doing a pretty good job, conditional on utilities and rival signals, predicting success at a density. Whereas at Arvins, really like the signal, conditional on everything else, seems to be bad. What it's doing is that it's informative about preferences. Okay. The Copenhagen signal seems to be doing something as well, conditional on utilities and other signals. But again, sort of the main takeaway I want you to get from this is that sort of there's students' preferences for the programs seem to be highly predictive of doing well at the programs. Share some model there real quickly. So this is just, we have a sort of number of people who applied quota 2 and were above the cutoff in the data. This is a density in the model in orange. We seem to be doing reasonably well. This is in sample. This is targeted. But, seem to be doing reasonably well there. And then I want to just show you one counterfactual in the last minute. So what do we do once we've estimated that? Well, we estimated also the non-graduation preferences that would be needed to rationalize the program being indifferent between people at the margin at different values of X. We take those out, and then we run a counterfactual where the programs commonly observe the utility shocks and the signals of every candidate. Okay? So this is kind of a benchmark where we're just killing off all of the imperfect information. And so like everything that's relevant for the potential outcome and for the program's payoffs is going to be commonly observed by the programs, and then we run college proposing data. So what we've got on the y-axis is sort of persistence. The probability that you're still enrolled 3 years later is conditional on being matched to the program. Okay. So that fails either if you don't enroll or if you enroll but then drop out. Blue dots are sort of model baseline, and you get, in the early years of the post period, 4 or 5 percentage point gain from this benchmark, a couple of percentage point gain in persistence toward the end of the sample. Okay, so there seems to be some scope for improving persistence here by shutting down information problems. And wrap up. So hopefully I've convinced you that interdependent values exist here, that they matter for production of doctors. And then this is something that's going to make us think about implications for market design. So under the current scheme, if I like a density, but I look like I wouldn't because I live near Harvard's, I'm at a disadvantage. And that can lead to inefficiency. There are things you can think about to try to address that problem. So you could let programs observe students' rankings or have a multi-round process like early decision. Those things, however, would create incentives for students to strategize. So those are empirical questions, whether those things would work well. And you can think about feasible ways for programs to share information. Yeah, something like a common exam. And that's where we're going next. Thanks.